So it's like 6 something in the morning. I've got a big interview on Friday, and I'm thinking, I'm thinking of all those points and trying to, when someone asks you about your practice, and your mind goes blank. This always seems to be the way for me. I don't know why it is, but it's one of those. It's just the feeling that you end up having. I don't know, my mind goes blank. But I know who I am, and I know what I do. And when I think about my practice, God, it's taken me so long to get this far. And that's not in terms of recognition. I'm not talking about like awards or the exhibitions or anything like that. I mean like the journey in which I've taken, the subsequent bodies of knowledge, the different opportunities or experiences of engagement, of immersing yourself in places, with people, in communities, in all different kinds of environments, like all of those things, form together this overarching story, this novel, like some kind of, Scheherazad's tale. Okay, it's 6 a.m. All right, give me to say. So it's all of these things, all of these pieces wrapped together to then form this kind of this cord or this rope that is actually, with every year, every month, every time you sit down and you do something, you consider something, you think about where you are within the spaces and places within your life, where you're going, that's really important, because is it where you want to be? This meeting I have Monday morning. So, right, tell me about your practice. And for me, I would say my practice is about stories, creating stories. I've always loved them. I've always, since a kid, I always loved that feeling of falling into another world within my imagination. Okay? But the stories, I think, as I became an adult and as art became increasingly a means by which I negotiated my world, the creation of stories, like the construction of them, the creating a world where someone will fall into it, to understand, literally fall into your mind, where they fall into your psyche when you're telling the story, to such a point where, if you're really successful, it's no longer a story anymore, it's a mythology. It becomes a mythology. It's embedded within that space or time or people. Do you know what I mean? And having that closest to it, that sensuality of me being able to speak to you is such an important factor. It was one of the things that I find extraordinary. So when it comes to telling these stories, I think, as I just touched on, the main things, one of the biggest parts of that practice is learning. That finding, understanding, embedding and internalizing bodies of knowledge. It's the foundation and the construction of that story, but it's also, essentially that's what stories do. They convey bodies of knowledge, from value systems, belief systems, origin stories, humor, life, tragedy, drama. They convey all these things. And a lot of the time, the reason we have them as children is to learn critical information, critical ways of which, how you're supposed to engage your world, how you are supposed to engage others, your ability to dream and imagine things for yourself, for your family, for your community. It starts from that series of visual, or could be movement, or however that story is presented to you by the person as well. So many times I think that is so, it penetrates you, the way in which the person who's giving you that story shares it with you. And I think that in itself leads to this, within this ecology, the immersive experience. So when I've travelled to different places, like Sierra Leone, like Peru, those bodies of knowledge that I've been reading about, say percentage of that, a lot of that maybe academic text, it's, it's reading, it's, maybe going to institutions, schools, institutions, whatever. trying to learn about the space you've been before you've got there to understand it as much as possible. And then when you get there, do you know what I mean? Like when you go to the Amazon, the Amazon's the Amazon, and it's very, very different. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, David Attenborough and everything. There's a mythology. There's a kind of beautified mythology there when you watch the nature programs. You know, I mean, yes, now more it's much more cutting because of climate change, and they're trying to convey the critical kind of urgency that we have to have within that. But when you are there and it's like an entire place is living, moving, but you can't see anything and everything's trying to eat you, which is very, very real, and I refuse to be the person to die in that situation, do you know what I mean? Then what you really end up having is like, it's the immersion, it's the gap between what is read and what is felt, like the sensuality of it, the lived experience of it, the embodiment of it, your fear. Do you know what I mean? It's your fear, it's your happiness, it's all of the, it's the intimacy of the experience, because that's where then you come to your engagement. That's where your engagement, that's where my engagement is. That's how then I can flesh out a story to you, or it makes it so much more real or transcendent or transformative, because I'm able truly to show you another world, and I can share that with you and talk to you about it. And then ideally the best thing that I love is then when that becomes reciprocal. So the immersive experience, the immersion within different worlds, coupling that with the engagement, me being able to connect and link and speak with you, or the environment, you know, bodily walking the paths of the land that I see every day. You know what I mean? The way they're treated, the way they're cared for or not, you know. This kind of creative ecology, the construction of worlds, the construction of stories is, you know, that's my practice. And there's something like the Sacred Ecologist project that we have, that I'm speaking about at this interview. You know, it's all of those things. I've been walking these paths and walking the land for months because I knew this place, but I didn't know it, not when I was restricted, where, you know, I couldn't go further geographically, because actually obviously you spend less time in a place if you're able to walk all over the world and everywhere. If you can no longer do that and it's only this place, then you forensically examine it and feel it, because those are the only paths that you have to walk every day, and that's why CAHJ has intensified this development so much. So I'm walking this land, I'm seeing the littered every day. I'm walking these paths and I'm meeting new people, I'm meeting local residents, and then they're telling me these stories. Like quite a few times now, I'm on the paths, walking past the bird hides, or, you know, past lakes within the woodlands, and I'll stop and they're, you know, so be like, oh, how you doing today? I'm like, yeah, I'm good, man, how are you? Do you know what I mean? It's like, this guy I just met, Roger, you know, he loves entomology. And we stood on the path for like 45 minutes talking, and he told me all about the ecological heritage of the area, a lot of the contention that there is as this area is being restored, all these different kinds of things. So, you know, this, I find this cycle of this ecology within this work. That's why I call it the Sacred Ecologist, because I think there's something fundamentally sacred about not just in your engagement with the land, your engagement with residents, your engagement with, again, you know, with knowledge, with learning. And this project is enriching me literally day by day. The more and more I work on it, the more that I feel out, the more that I learn about more communities. The learning program that I submitted with the Centre for African and Caribbean Family Organisation in Croydon, you know, that learning program is still fluid and we work with them, but the fact that now this lived experience, this immersive environment, I'm now, you know, that you're bringing more people into it, so they're immersing with you, and that fundamentally changes the dynamic of what's happening, of what's being learned, of what's being shared. And to have that, you know, that you both share an equity within that engagement. So yes, I'm the lead artist, okay, for that learning program, and in many ways it's thought, you know, it's like you're in the position of authority or power, but that in itself I want to try and erase and pull back as much as possible. So, you know, we both have so there's an equality of footing, or at least a kind of it renegotiates or reorientates the equity within the situation. So those students, who they are, what they think, where they come from, their perceptions, perspectives, their philosophies, which they're already forming. Do you know what I mean? We're bringing those all in together, all those perspectives, and they all have weight. They all have significance and inform the journey that we're about to go on, because every time I take that journey, it's a different journey. Every time I walk the land, it's a different path. It's a different place. You know what I mean? The seasons alone change the physical aesthetic of what that place is, of where it is. Every time I speak to someone, every time I learn something, I look at that land in a completely different way. I look at the space in a different way. I look at myself in a different way. I become that little bit more invested. So it's transformational, but it's also, I think, it's transcendental as well. You're transcending and becoming something more. And every time you have that feeling that you're transcending either yourself, place, I don't know, that you've just evolved just that tiny little bit more, or moved that forward that little bit more. That transformational aspect is extraordinary, and just embeds deeper and deeper. And I think that's the thing with this practice, and that's the thing with the sacred conscious, why I think it also has a lot of legs, and why ideas of it, I find now from the learning program, are so similar to, say, what open schoolies do, and they're kind of, and say, like, even the events I think you had the other day, what is it? We let go of who we are. Can we let go of who we are? What makes us who we are? And the questions that came into that. So I think it was a Centre for Critical Thought, wasn't it, Ian Mackenzie, that was leading those sessions. And I thought those are fundamental questions, are the things that I'm going to be asking those kids. And they're things where, this model for looking at the Beddington farmlands. So for me, the sculptures created are the ones that, they're markers within the land, but we're not actually marking the land as such. What we're actually doing through creating these maquettes, we're making these kind of, I used to love this when I used to do visual anthropology, like, when you see from different cultures, the markers that you have there, do you know what I mean? Like, so from Aboriginal cultures to, within the Amazon to Papua New Guinea, markers being things that become embodied as almost fetish items of marking space, of journey, of story, of community, that fundamental kind of human marker within a place that we've been doing for thousands of years, is bringing that kind of the oldest way of engaging land and self, and bringing that into contemporary urban environments, and seeing how, and seeing what we will construct today within the landscape that we find ourselves in, within Brexit, within climate change, within all of these things, all these factors, Black Lives Matter, and seeing what that means, and building these maquettes. Fundamentally, obviously, we were working digitally, of building these maquettes. And I love this idea of, because obviously you're not going to be environmentally impacted directly the land, that you have maquettes, and then you can blow them up. Oh, sorry, Bubby. That these sculptures could be like monoliths blown up digitally within these environmental spaces. Do you know what I mean? That you can be walking in London, looking up and seeing these things. Down here. Yeah, that's me, babe. Yeah. That's me, Mum. Yeah. So. Yeah. So that I find, that's extraordinary, that your work becomes something other than itself that could transform the environment. When you're looking out to seeing stuff, we're not putting in these. I'm not building like a monolith when I'm drilling into the ground. Things. We can play with the markers of the land and where we are, and what potentially we can see, because there is no limit within the digital, environment of these spaces once they're captured and documented. And I think that's really extraordinary. And then linking that with the stories, with the historical narrative, the oral narrative, with the community narratives, of bringing in those kind of Caribbean sensibilities that I grew up with, the humour of them. Do you know what I mean? Of my mum sitting on Margate on a sunny day with a fleece and a bobble hat. Do you know what I mean? In the middle of summer, or my uncle, washing his hair. Like a Timotei advert with like aloe vera and everything. All these things, all these stories. add to the world that we're going to be bringing people in, and I think that's an extraordinary opportunity. But I think the engagement and the immersion within this is everything. So working within, a program where we can not just reach new audiences, but I really, for me, want to directly engage with them, lend them, because bodies of knowledge aren't just in the academic journals and books. They're within the people, they're within the community, they're their lived histories, their engagement. It's their funny stories that's there. Do you know what I mean? And all these things are just they're critical to the worlds that we're going to create and share.
What are you doing?
Well,